Money is a great servant. It's a horrible master. And it's kind of one or the other. Either it's serving you or you're serving it. But we've even gone beyond that, where we are worshiping and pursuing consumption and comfort as a goal rather than stewardship.
How do you take the lessons of financial planning from the rugged terrains of Alaska and make them universal? Joining us today is Chad Hufford, a seasoned financial planner and the founder of Veritas in Anchorage, Alaska. Chad, who grew up under the tutelage of his father in the financial sector, brings a unique blend of personal experience and professional expertise. As a devoted father of 6 and an avid outdoorsman, Chad integrates his life's passion with his professional mission, educating and empowering families across America to achieve financial independence. Tune in as we explore Chad's journey from learning the ropes in a family-run business to becoming the longest tenured Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro in Alaska, and how he uses his coaching mindset to help clients navigate the complexities of financial planning. And stay tuned, please, to the very end for a special announcement about some future episodes that we have. Chad, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to encouraging, uplifting your audience and helping them create a more abundant life.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. You are episode 299. We've got 300 coming up, and I'll talk more about it at the end. We've been going here for 6 years. Sounds like we talked a little bit beforehand. We both had some fun weeks, so I'm glad we're here recording. The listener needs to be thankful, right?
Absolutely. And I just was reminding myself, as I was going through some of this, and some of the problems that I'm dealing with are problems that some people would love to have, and they're frustrating in the moment, but it's good to have perspective.
Yeah.
There's no sanctification that happens inside a comfort zone, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. We may talk about perspective as we go through here, because I love talking about perspective when it comes to money and finances, and looking forward to getting your perspective on just what it's like being in Alaska. So first question though, give you a choice here. Would you rather answer, what do you do, or who are you? Just pick it and go ahead and answer.
What do I do? I would say professionally, I make sure people don't run out of money or purpose in retirement. And I think a lot of people in my field only focus on the first part. But if you run out of purpose before you run out of money, it's hard to experience freedom and abundance. And when I say abundance, I'm talking about so much more than just money, finances, and material things. In fact, I would say that's what I do more as a person, is try to empower people to pursue a better version of themselves and a life with more meaning and freedom.
It's cool that you brought up purpose, because I think I picked up on that, but I didn't realize you would lead with it. My wife and I right now are hanging out in the warmth of Arizona in a 55 and older community. And it is fascinating. A lot of these people are retired. A lot of these people have done well financially. But my wife and I, we're still working. We've got stuff going on. And it is interesting to see how many people at this age, mature age, they really don't have purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And this is diving into the deep end of the pool here, but what comes up when you bring up with people that not only do you want them to handle money, because most people are probably thinking money's the answer, and then you start talking purpose.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So we could spend the whole episode just on this right here. So number one, money is a tool. When money becomes the goal or the objective, then we're on a dangerous path. Money is a tool you use to build a life of meaning, purpose, and freedom. It's what you use to build independence and not the end goal. I think here in the United States, we've done ourselves a huge disservice by treating work as the thing to avoid. Like, I'm going to build up a bunch of money. I'm going to save a bunch of money so one day I can quit my job. Well, guys, you can quit your job today. The government will take care of you. I'm not suggesting that. But if that's your goal, is to quit working, then you can just turn this podcast off right now. But the goal is independence to pursue what is even more meaningful. And I think so many people focus on what they're retiring from. They don't really have a vision for what they're retiring to. And Tim, to your point about the community you're in. Most of these people are successful. They did well. They're the worst types of people to not have meaningful pursuit because they're probably more goal focused. They're more, your audience as well, more ambitious, more intentional. They're the worst type of people to not have a mission. And when you take that away from somebody, they will often end up pursuing the wrong things. They will chase the things that they shouldn't be chasing because they don't have something meaningful to pursue.
Yeah. Or worse, they'll do nothing. That's what we see, some doing nothing. It's really funny here. We're recording this on a Thursday just to put a timestamp on it. And in this community at about 4 p.m., all these people start bringing their chairs out to some little common areas, and they have these happy hours, and they're not all alcohol related, but many of them are. And I'm still doing some work. I'm sorry I can't hang out. I'd love to chit chat with y'all, but so that's one thing, but at least they're being social. And where we are here, there's 32 pickleball courts. And I love a little pickleball. Okay. I'm not against pickleball, but there are people that will play 5 and 6 hours of pickleball a day. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. I think it might be better than doing nothing. But my wife and I will often say, do you think that's what God created them for? To when they hit 65, 70, 75, some are older than that, to play pickleball all day long. And again, maybe it is. I'm not judging it, but and this is a little bit more of an active area than some retirement areas and also. So, I mean, and again, this is a question to ask, Chad, but I'm sure people come to you for the money piece.
Mm-hmm.
How do you start nudging them to think about the purpose piece? Leaders, let me ask you a question. Are you driving your organization forward, or are you just reacting to the daily chaos? If you're feeling stuck in the weeds and struggling to focus on the big picture, it's time to shift gears. As a leader, your greatest strength is your ability to think strategically and proactively. That's what leading is. I specialize in helping leaders like you implement strategies that move your leadership and your organization from reactive to proactive. I'm offering a free coaching call to help you identify actionable strategies to become a more proactive and strategic leader. This call will give you clarity and direction. I guarantee it. Book your free coaching call now by hitting the book coaching call link in the show notes or visit timwinders.com/coaching. Now, back to the show.
Again, it goes back to, pursuit. We want people to be focused on what they're retiring to, not what they're retiring from. Are you fleeing a career? And even if it's a great job, you love what you did. We work with a lot of oil field folks. We work with a lot of law enforcement. They're careers that are hard on the body. You might love what you do. It's just not something you want to do forever. Are you leaving or exiting a career, or are you entering a new chapter of your life? And I think that perspective is so important between those two. I'll just give you a little metaphor. As you mentioned in your introduction, I have 6 kids. So we watch a lot of nature shows. And there's a leopard chasing a warthog. And I'm watching this, I'm thinking, both of these animals are running as hard as they possibly can. They're as hard as their legs and lungs will allow them. But only one of them is having any fun right now. And the leopard is pursuing something, and the warthog is fleeing. The warthog is running for their life. I think too many people spend life using finances to flee from something rather than to pursue something even more important. I just believe when people hit a period in their life where they no longer have to go to work, we call it a job optional life. Not even retirement, but when people don't need to produce a paycheck anymore, I believe that's when they can have the biggest impact, the biggest years of impact than they ever had before, because they don't have to spend the time, the energy going to work, doing things that might not really align with their soul and their passion.
So it's interesting, the fields that you brought up, and I'm sure you work with people outside of the oil field and also first responders and things like that, but those are, in my opinion, they seem to be physical type jobs, especially the oil field. And I could see that a lot of people would want to not have to work as hard physically. Do you see that in that oil field industry, or is that just me maybe reading it wrong because I have no knowledge of that industry?
No, you're absolutely right. That's a big part of it. Another big part, at least here in Alaska, is a lot of these men and women, they're working above the Arctic Circle. I mean, there's actually a place in Alaska called North Pole, and we don't see Santa a lot, but it's a long ways past North Pole, Alaska. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And this time of year, they hardly see the sun. They're working sometimes in 40 below temperatures, and they're going weeks at a time without seeing their family. And again, some of these folks, they love what they do, not all the time, but they give up a lot. There's a lot of sacrifice. So we're not in a hurry to get anybody to retire, but we are trying to do is get them to a place relatively early in life where they no longer have to produce that paycheck. They have the independence to transition to maybe a new career, maybe take a lower paying job here in town, but they don't have to do those things anymore if they don't choose to. And some people do. We have several actually. A couple come to mind. They're in their 70s that really enjoy what they're doing. They love their community. Their kids are grown, and that is like their family kind of, but we just want them to make that choice and not be dictated by their job or their finances. And I think, going back to your question about, people come to us for money, but money is just a tool. What we're trying to do is get them to think about what do you want your life to look like? Who do you want to become? And we start reverse engineering that because, again, money is just a tool to build that. It's an important part of the whole equation, but it is not the entire equation.
And some of those people might end up down here in Arizona where I'm at.
We have a lot of them down there, but no, we have a lot. And again, I love the sunshine. I love being able to be in shorts, and I love taking a break. We talked about the importance of stillness. Like, I'm not saying you should be busy, busy, busy all the time. I believe we were created with margin. God instituted the Sabbath. If it was important for God to take a rest, I think as human beings, we probably need it too. So I believe it's important to find rest and relaxation. It's important to have balance. But again, I just disagree with the fact that retirement is where you completely unplug and you have 20 years of weekends, just a 2-decade vacation. I've seen that happen, and I've seen a lot of emptiness and loneliness that come with that. And the people who are most fulfilled in a job optional life are the people who are still serving, they're still connected, they're still stretching themselves, they're growing, and they're making some of the biggest impact of their life.
Right. Yeah. My wife and I have recently come to terms with both of our mothers are still living. My dad passed a few years ago, and we've kind of come to terms with what's going on in their lives is they really don't have anything that they're living for, nothing they're pursuing or going after. They're both in their 80s. And it actually has been a little bit, not depressing for us, but eye-opening might be a better term, that we are purposing not to be that way, not judging or throwing our moms under the bus or anything like that. And, this kind of brings up something really cool because I noticed that your father, you commented that your father had similar business and you learned some things from him. One of the things that has come up, because we've already recorded, this is episode 299, we've recorded 301 and 302. We invited some guests back that were 5 years ago, some of our first guests, and both of them, there became a theme of when people are reaching a certain age, how do we turn around and share wisdom as, we didn't call it old people, but as mature, how do we share some of the things we learned with younger generations? So I'll pose this in the form of a question. I picked up on that you seem to have learned a good bit from your father and growing up, and I want to ask a little bit about your growing up in just a little while, but talk a little bit about that role maybe that your father had in sharing wisdom, information with you as he matured.
Do you know who Larry Burkett is? Does that name sound familiar to you, Tim? Okay, so a lot of people listening to this will be very familiar with Dave Ramsey. But before Dave was ever on a budget, there was a guy named Larry Burkett, and that's what we listened to growing up. And I thought it was child abuse at the time. I'm like, we're sitting around a radio listening to this guy talk about budgeting and money and stewardship and all these things. But that was the household I was raised in. And we live in a culture now, Tim, where money is taboo. We don't talk about that, which means people repeat the mistakes of those around them, and they don't learn from the victories, the wins. So we just have the blind leading the blind in a lot of respects. I didn't realize that that's how people lived. I thought it was just normal to sit around the dinner table and talk about maybe a charity you were excited about giving to, or what you were saving up for, or the jobs you were planning to do. I mean, as kids, my dad would give us opportunities to earn money. It wasn't an allowance. Opportunities to earn money based on a goal. And there were sometimes extra incentives. I just thought it was normal to talk about money. And the other thing that was really important, though, Tim, not only a couple things. Number one, my parents modeled it. They didn't tell us one thing and do something else. And I believe more is caught than taught. And it's really hard if we tell our kids, hey, you need to be intentional with your money. You need to be a good steward. You need to be generous. You need to plan for your future. But just don't do anything as I'm doing, because I'm spending everything I have. I don't live on a budget. We don't give consistently. We're not, but that's what happens a lot of times is, do what I say, not what I do. My parents taught us, but they walked their talk. The other thing that was really cool is I grew up with my parents, especially my dad, teaching Larry Burkett's class. They called it Crown Financial, and it was kind of the predecessor to what everybody knows as Financial Peace University now. A lot of the same principles. They go back to Proverbs. They're not Larry's principles, not Dave's principles. They're God's principles. They've been working for 4,000 years, roughly. But they taught those in our churches, in the community. And what I saw, Tim, was so powerful. I saw the impact that had, not just in people's finances, but in their life in general. Because when people started to take control of money and having discipline and victory in that area, it had a ripple effect into so many other areas of their life. And when God's people start using money God's way, it's amazing the impact that has and how the rest of their life lines up.
The cool thing about that, I just went straight to a scripture. It's in Matthew 6, somewhere early in Matthew 6. You can't serve two masters. And I'm pretty confident that many people are attempting to serve two, but you can't serve two because that money is such an important thing for it. The thing that popped into my mind, and this is going to put a little bit of a timestamp on when we're recording this, is that we don't have good examples of fiscal responsibility in discussing money. And we've got such an example of that right now in the U.S. government, in that Elon Musk and Donald Trump, I'm not going political on this. This shouldn't be a party issue, but they are going through line by line with what the government is spending. And some people are excited about it. Some people are not. And we haven't had fiscal responsibility in our government. I don't think we've had good models in our culture, Chad. And so the fact that you had it in your family, I think is really cool. I'll pause. Any thoughts on that?
A lot of thoughts. So number one, again, there's a phrase or a saying that says fish discover water last. I did not realize how blessed I was to grow up in that culture, in that environment. Again, I thought it was normal. The other thing, you're absolutely right, is we don't have good examples. And the people who are doing it well are doing it quietly. I had somebody in my office the other day, this was yesterday, multimillionaires, completely financially independent. They retired to go do missions work in rural Alaska, and they're wearing Carhartts and old beat up jeans. Like, you would never know it. And again, I'm not saying you need to be flashy, but the people who are doing really well, who are good stewards, who do plan for the future, are usually doing it quietly. And I think money has always been worshiped. Wealth has always been worshiped. But today in our culture, Tim, we don't even worship wealth anymore. We worship consumption. It is the exact opposite of wealth. When you see somebody on Instagram or TikTok or whatever kids are listening to these days, it's the fancy cars and the awesome vacations and the $4,000 handbags and the designer jeans. That's not wealth. That's actually the consumption. It's the spending of wealth. It's the exact opposite. So not only are we, as you said, drawn to serving money, and I believe money is a great servant. It's a horrible master. And it's kind of one or the other. Either it's serving you or you're serving it. But we've even gone beyond that, where we are worshiping and pursuing consumption and comfort as a goal rather than stewardship.
Yeah, that's such a big topic that I'm not sure I want us to dive into because it would be a great conversation. But I think the thing I want to dig a little bit on, Chad, is it's very obvious that you grew up in a household that they lived within their means, they spent less than they made. And I believe that I had an example of that. But one of the things I did growing up in the 80s, I just decided I was going to make me some money. It took me a while to learn that you can't spend more than you make. And I loved in the book, you talked about some of the homeschool things and you painted a picture. Y'all dressed alike, not only dressed alike, but it was homemade clothing. And I had this vision of the Von Trapp family in Sound of Music. Would that be an accurate depiction of your family growing up?
No, because the Von Trapps were talented and they could sing. Homeschooling looked so different than it did back then. Like we were homeschooled so hard. We were the most homeschooled. And there's no such thing as snow days. I'm here in Anchorage, Alaska. We get horrible ice storms, snowstorms, they cancel school. And that just meant for us, we had more time to do school. Mom's like, we're not going anywhere today. We're doing extra. If you got sick, there was no bringing soup and crackers to you in bed. It was, here's your math book. I'm sorry you don't feel good, but you can do this in your bed. Please don't get vomit on the math book because your brothers and sisters are going to have to use this same book too. My mom was a pioneer of sorts, and we baked our own bread. We ground our own wheat. I mean, we were weird. We were different. My mom made us matching clothes. We looked like a traveling Where's Waldo convention. I mean, looking back on it, it's funny now, but at the time, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is awful. And my therapist says I'm well adjusted now. We grew up very, very differently. And as I got older, I realized how that was kind of a blessing, even though it was painful in the moment. And granted, we probably didn't have to be as different as we were, but being different is a superpower now these days because our culture is we've made normal very unhealthy behaviors in our relationships, in our finances. The thing that you said, just living within your means, that is such a simple concept, but almost nobody does it. And it doesn't matter how good your investments are or how good your financial plan is. If you don't live within your means, you can't feed your investment. And that is the number one rule of wealth building, less than you produce. And so few people actually do it. Like, oh, that's simple. I know that. Well, then do it. It's like saying, well, I know I should eat less and move more to get in better shape. No, that's it. You got to do the simple things.
Yeah, and it takes discipline and things like that. I want to talk about some of those in just a moment, but there's one other thing on the homeschool thing I want to ask. You mentioned you're okay now, you've gone through therapy and all that kind of stuff, but I also know, I think I read that you and Tiffany, y'all are homeschooling y'all's children. Being homeschooled yourself, and now you and your wife are homeschooling your children. What are one or two things that you are never going to do with your children that you had growing up because it was just too, I don't want to say traumatic, but it's like, okay, that we're not doing it that way. And then what are some things that's like, absolutely, this is one thing we're doing because you are still homeschooling. So what are some scars that you might still have from your experience growing up?
So I would say overall, I'm very grateful I was homeschooled. My parents didn't do it perfectly. They're fallible human beings just as I am. We're not doing it perfectly, but the benefits, the blessings from that far outweighed any of the detriments. The isolation was hard. I'm an introvert, but there are definitely some very lonely times. And I know that affects who I am today. So, we're very intentional surrounding our kids with good kids from solid homes who are like-minded and trying to find kids that actually stretch our kids and challenge them. We also want to expose them a little bit to some of the craziness that's out there in the world. Some of our friends, the few we had growing up, some were so isolated and sheltered that they didn't have the opportunity to build up that resistance and resilience that you need. It's almost like having an immune system. You have to be exposed to some of it to build up that resistance. They need to know what's in this crazy world. They just don't need to be inundated and overwhelmed by it. Some of the things that we are trying to do, though, giving them the opportunity to also learn just practical lessons. And, we're not trying to raise good kids. We're trying to raise good adults, and getting them to interact very early on with adults, with our peers. My daughter started working here last year at Veritas and interacting with absolutely phenomenal people on a regular basis. Kids will rise or fall to the standard that you set. And my parents set a high standard for us, and we figured out a way to meet it. So I'm definitely taking those lessons and the encouragement that I got from my family, showing us that all these limitations that people have on themselves are very much self-imposed. We're not going to accept the results that everybody else is getting, which means we have to have some different actions and behaviors. And so those are the things we're trying to teach our kids as well.
Are you dressing them all alike? Are you making them all dress alike? Or,
No, I wish, man, Tim, I wish we had a picture. Like, people probably think, oh, he's exaggerating. No, I have pictures of our entire family. There was 5 of us kids, so 7 of us total, wearing these matching clothes with these horrible, like, red and blue stripe patterns. I mean, it was bad news. Now, my wife will say we will have our kids coordinate, but they don't match. So for family pictures, special events, stuff like that, she's got a great eye for that style, but no matching clothes over here.
Yeah, that does kind of bring up some of the not so positive stereotypes of homeschooling and things like that. But here's the thing: the reason I ask it a lot when I have people like that, we homeschooled our kids, is that people are flocking into the homeschool arena right now, and I think people that have done it, or your second generation homeschool, I think we need to share some wisdom, because a lot of people are learning as they go. And so I do think that's a good thing. One of the things I was trying to think of, how many people I've had on the podcast in the 299 episodes that were from Alaska. And I couldn't think of anyone. I mean, that we haven't had anyone, but what are some things that those of us in the lower 48 really should know about people that, you're second generation, at least Alaska? Sounds like your wife is too. Y'all are Alaskans. What are some things that we need to know about Alaska and people from Alaska?
Well, if you need some trivia, Alaska is the westernmost state, which makes sense. And we don't live down by Hawaii. That's just on your maps. We're actually up north quite a bit. But it is also the easternmost state, because the Aleutians, which is the arm that heads out west, goes so far. And the joke is, like, we can see Russia from here, right? But there's a lot of places in Alaska that are closer to Russia than they are to Anchorage, where I live. And it stretches so far that it actually is in the eastern hemisphere. So Alaska technically is the western and easternmost state. It's also such a huge state. We like to remind our friends in the smaller state of Texas that we're over twice their size, but we have such a vast difference in geography and terrain. Like, people say, what is it like living? Well, where I live is completely different than, let's say, Fairbanks or down in Juneau, where our capital. There's so many different climates that even within Alaska, there's deserts, we have rainforests, it is an unbelievable place to live. And I've lived here my entire life, as you said, and I still have experienced only a fraction of it.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's tough, we visit a lot of national parks. We've been traveling around for 12 years, but 6 years in our motor coach. And we did Oregon like in 2019. And then we were planning to start mapping out how we could get up to Alaska. And then COVID hit, and we were like going, I don't know if, we can't kind of go through Canada. It is a long way, should we do something different? But one of the things I've looked at is some of the national parks there. I don't want to say you almost can't get to them, but if you really look at some of the land there, it is so remote, so massive. It's almost daunting for someone who says, yeah, I'd like to pick off a few national parks. Have you been able to get to some of that? You're an outdoors guy, so what all have you been able to quote unquote explore in Alaska that you could share?
Well, it's both, and I don't want to. I mean, there are some very accessible places. There's some places that are nearly impossible to get to. So for people planning a trip to Alaska, I don't want to make it feel more daunting than it is. I mean, you can have a nice vacation. This is like going back in time up here. We have running water, electricity, we have internet on most days. But there are places where you can only get to by like boat or plane. There's some extremely remote places, and some of those places are so ruggedly beautiful that, I mean, it's awe-inspiring. Like, you will look at some of these
Mm.
places and think, I don't know if another human being has walked over there. But there's gorgeous places to drive to. There's places, we have a train system that takes you to some of I'll call them the kind of hot spots, some of the key places. Like, if you're going to only be in Alaska for a week, you need to see these things. So it is a mix, but there's definitely, for people who are more adventurous, that want to get out to those more remote places. There's a lot of air taxis, and even I talked to a guy yesterday that runs a helicopter service, and they bring to people the parts of Alaska that most Alaskans have never seen. And one of my favorite places here in Alaska is actually where my wife and I built. It overlooks Anchorage, and I'm only about 15, 20 minutes away from my office, but it overlooks the entire city. We have moose and bears and elk that come through our yard, and it's a beautiful perspective. It is peaceful. We had a gorgeous sunset last night. One of my favorite things to do, I was going to say in the summer, is sit outside with a book and read. In the winter, a little too cold for that, but sitting by we have these big windows facing where the sun sets, and just sitting there and just taking it in. And I pinch myself sometimes, Tim, like, that we live here. And I tell my kids, like, we experience on a regular basis for what a lot of people is a bucket list. And, like, don't ever let this get old, because,
Mm.
I mean, just, it's like God paints a masterpiece every single day that we get to experience.
As my wife and I have traveled, we kind of coined this when we were in New Zealand for a few months. There are beautiful places all over, but then there
Yes.
are how great thou art
Mhm.
places. And it sounds like you kind of described something that's how great thou art. Well, my wife and I are at 49 states, and Alaska is the only state we have not stepped foot on, done anything with. So it'll definitely be in our plans over the next few years to figure out how to do that. We've even discussed, we're not huge cruise fans, but we've considered doing a cruise just to kind of get that way and explore it that way. So we shall see.
Well, come
But
on.
yeah. But one thing, Chad, I'm always intrigued by how people. I know your father was in the business, roughly, it sounds like, and then you kind of moved into the financial business. But was it kind of a done deal that you were going to go into this industry, or how did that come to be? If there's a story behind it.
I'll try to give you this short version because it's a longer story, but no, that was never the intent. I actually have a degree in biochemistry, and medicine was my path. And I was on my way to becoming what I thought was going to be a hotshot surgeon. And I met the woman who is now my wife, and she did not grow up like I did, Tim. She grew up in legitimate poverty. She remembers having Christmas in a homeless shelter. I mean, that's the kind of situation she grew up in. And what I realized is what she was really longing for was stability. She wanted a family. She wanted somebody to raise kids with. And not that you can't have balance as a surgeon or as a physician, but a couple of my mentors had difficult conversations with me. And they told me, they said, we know how you're wired. And if you pursue this path, it might own you and you'll love it. And that's the most dangerous part, is you won't realize what's happening because you're going to be so engrossed that you won't see that you're sacrificing your family for your career, but they will feel it. And that wasn't a trade I was willing to make. And I think I ultimately chose this because I saw my dad at every game. I saw him at every recital, every play, everything that we did. My parents were there. not only there, but they were present. They're very much involved with what we were doing. I wanted that. And I thought my dad can make that happen in this career field, then maybe I can do that as well. So it did not start as a passion. It started as a very practical way for me to provide the family life that I wanted. I wanted to own a business. I didn't want a business that owned me. So I started from scratch and built it that way. But then my passion for this grew, especially 2008, 2009, as I saw the destruction that finances can have in somebody's life. Because our bodies, our minds cannot compartmentalize stress. When you're stressed about your finances, when you have anxiety and frustrations, they will bleed into every area of your life. And we saw that 2008, 2009. And I thought, this is where I need to be. This is where I can make the biggest impact.
What'd you learn during that time that you could share with us?
I learned perseverance in a new way. Sometimes there are no answers. There are only questions. And Psalm 119, 105 says, your word, Lord, is a light unto my path and a lamp unto my feet. And what I was looking for in 2008, 2009 was a floodlight, like that lit up the entire highway. And what I learned in that time is sometimes God only shows us the next step. He doesn't show us the whole path. He lights up just enough so we don't trip and so we don't go off course. But we don't get to see the whole road ahead, which is good, because if I had seen the whole road ahead, I think I would have quit. I don't think I'd be here today. I think I would have, not to say that medicine would have been a horrible contingency, but I think that's where I would have gone. It was a much clearer pathway, and I would have enjoyed it. And I think I still would have had been enjoying a wonderful life, but it wouldn't be the same as what I have. And I learned to persevere in the midst of extreme ambiguity.
Yeah. Did you have financial clients at that time?
Yeah, I started in 2007. It was just before. So it started with a baby on the way, with a biochemistry
good timing,
degree.
man. Good timing.
Like I said, I would never want to go through it again. And if I could have seen where the road was leading, I don't think I would have taken it. But God showed me just enough to take the next step. And I think that's one of the things that really hold people back is we want certainty. And too often we will trade away security and impact for certainty in the moment. And somebody's ability to tolerate ambiguity is a huge, huge indicator of the quality of life that they're going to live. The more ambiguity that you can stomach, that you can handle, I think the more potential and meaning your life is going to have. I mean, obviously it's a broad statement, but certainty gets a lot of us in trouble. And I learned to give up my need for certainty during that time.
One thing that's cool, it came to me, is I actually think you have more credibility because you were in the industry during that time. Because one of the things I'm noticing in interacting with people here in 2025 is that there are many people that have totally forgotten at that time. They know nothing about history. Some people that have forgotten what went on in 2021, 22 also.
Sure.
And, I still have scars from 08, 9, 10. And I think it brings perspective. I love the word perseverance you brought up. I think in the book, you talk about the importance of just being consistent and steady. Those two aren't the same word, but they're really related, especially when it comes to financial planning for the individual. Talk about the importance of just consistency.
Well, I think perseverance, you could even define it as consistency under pressure or consistency amidst trials. So it's consistently doing the thing when you are faced with challenges. And consistency is hard even on the best days. You already mentioned you're recording early in 2025, and the gyms are already empty. Everybody was gung ho about 2025, new me, new year. This, gonna get my body back, all these things, and they go out, and these people haven't worked out in 20 years, and they're downloading like Navy SEAL workouts, trying to do what the special forces do, and they burn out. It's not what you do one day. It's what you do every day that matters. And the people who are successful in relationships and business and money, in finance, I mean, they're not necessarily doing things completely different from everybody else, but what makes them different is they do consistently what most people do only sporadically. So it is consistency under fire that is absolutely necessary to build meaningful and sustainable wealth, and I think to build even a meaningful life.
Yeah, I was gonna, when you jumped on here, I was gonna comment on your pecs because you used a story in your book about some guy at a conference. I mean, but we're really from the waist up here, and I said that could get awkward just like that. We'll let people read the book and get the rest of that story. We won't go there, but
Well, the gist of it, just real quick, is somebody was trying to figure out, what's the secret to developing their upper body, and it was asking about all these different exercises and this technique and that technique. I said they'll all work, but you have to do them, and just don't miss your workout. And
yeah,
that's the most important. So there's a lot of ways to build wealth. There's a lot of ways to love your spouse and to show appreciation for your kids and to make them feel loved. There's a lot of avenues, but we have to consistently execute those things. And I don't mean this to be crass, but Warren Buffett, he has a quote, I believe it's Warren Buffett, that says, if you want a baby in a month, you can't go get 9 women pregnant. Like you can't go start all these different things and expect to speed up the process. It takes patience and consistency. You have to wait for time to develop. And I think too often people are looking for that shortcut. They're looking for the quick fix. We tell people all the time, this isn't about getting rich quick. It's about building wealth slowly and meaningfully. And when we look for shortcuts, we miss the paths that do work. It's kind of going back to the old tortoise and the hare. The tortoise wasn't sexy, wasn't flashy. He was slow and methodical, but he was persistent. He persevered, and he consistently took one step in front of the other. And that is exactly how your financial practice should work.
I noticed with me, one of the flaws that I'm hopeful that the work that the Lord and I have done have removed this from my personality is we, for the longest, had real estate companies leading up to '08. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, but you can probably guess. And one thing I recognized about real estate, the way we were building it and we were very aggressive. We were buying 3 to 5 single family homes or other properties per month, is that my mindset was always that the next deal was going to position us, which is not the right mindset. I'm looking back on it. I know that was wrong, but what I realized was that was the emotional state that was driving me. And I realized when I was reading through your book, I was thinking through the lessons you have. They're steady, they're calm. And I realized that emotions at time, the next deal was driving a lot of my financial decisions and things like that. Talk about how emotion plays into this. It's all throughout the book, but I never saw you really call out emotions. But talk about the pros and cons of emotions when we're dealing with our finances.
Well, it is an emotional journey, and we cannot disconnect our emotions from it. And I think that's one of the reasons why so much of the Bible talks about money. It's very emotionally charged, and it can get us off track if we're not careful. We are emotional beings. So I think emotions can get us in trouble when they start driving us. And this is one of the reasons we talk about life first. When people are coming to us for the first time, we talk, what do they want their life to look? We're trying to get positive emotions wrapped around what they're building long term, get it beyond their money. But we also see the flip side of this. You mentioned 2008, 2009, where scarcity and fear emotions were driving people. And it's good to have some fear, but fear can't dictate our decisions. When our emotions start making our decisions for us, that's when we get in trouble. And I like what you said about focusing on the next deal. Like, I think that's very common. It's the next investment, or what is this, I found this new mutual fund. If we're looking external for some new tool, we're missing the biggest part that we have stewardship over, and that's ourselves. And here in our culture, we try to fix poor money management with more money. We try to out earn poor financial decisions. A lot of those financial decisions are emotional. Maybe we feel insecure and we try to, we're trying to buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like, or we buy what we think other people will appreciate or admire. And what ends up happening is you can never out earn bad money management. It'd be like somebody who can't drive, giving them a faster car. We talked before we started recording. My daughter's been in 2 accidents in the last month. She's okay. The cars are not. But like, I'm not gonna buy her a Ferrari because she banged up the Honda CRV. Like, okay, we'll just give you more horsepower. That should fix it if you're just going faster. But that's what we do with money. People don't manage. They don't operate their finances well, and they try to solve it by just adding more money into the equation. And it actually intensifies those, maybe, I wouldn't call them bad emotions, but the control those emotions have over them. They don't get that part controlled. If their mindset doesn't get right, you add money that it's just fuel to the fire. Dave Ramsey says money makes you more of who you already are. It magnifies your strengths and your weaknesses.
And one of the things I recognize with me, and I think this is fairly common, is I had I'm not proud of admitting this, I had a get rich quick mindset. I had a short-term get rich quick, do a couple deals. That's going to set you up, and then you can, I don't know, retire, quit,
Right off
do
in the
something.
sunset or something. Yeah.
Yeah, right off in the sunset, go off into it. And, I've even gotten in the mode, and I think a lot of people need to do this, of not really checking a lot of the financial news daily, because I think most of the financial news are training people to think short term. The Fed makes a speech and the market goes up or down by 350 points, and they're acting as if that is significant. I mean, it's not insignificant, but I mean, we're being fed this short-term mindset.
And we're sensationalizing it, and we're teaching people that that's what matters. And we already kind of talked about this journey, right? The tortoise and the hare. The tortoise was steadily plodding along. If we take that step further, it's like a marathon. It's like a marathon up a mountain. But we're not going to be able to stay on the right path if we're always looking at something right in front of our face. It'd be like trying to read a book while hiking. You're going to probably fall off a cliff if you're hiking in Alaska. We need to keep our eyes on where we're traveling and making sure we're aligned with the path ahead. That's one of the biggest things that we do professionally, is actually create a path from where somebody is today, where they want to be in the future, something guiding their saving and investing decisions, and then hold them accountable to that path. But if we're always focusing on the news and the economic weather reports, we're focused on something so close to our face that will actually get us to veer off. And you're right, it's almost impossible to have a long-term mindset with so much emphasis on the short term. Here's the other thing that is, I think, equally important, is my industry, the financial industry and the news media, focuses on everything that you can't control. And we tell people, and I'm not saying me personally, my industry, we tell people how important it is. You said, what does the Fed say? What are interest rates going to do? What was the last jobs report? What are the inflation numbers? What's going on in Ukraine, in the Middle East? All those things, do they have an impact? Yes. But can you control any of them? No. So often people spend all their time and energy focusing on what they can't control, that they actually miss the opportunities to influence the things that they can control, and they give up their agency and they end up in a state of victimhood or helplessness.
That's interesting. As you were saying that, I've attempted to, my phone is actually my camera, so I can't pull it up here as an example, but we've got access to all of this data now. I think more than we need, but we won't get into that conversation. And one of the things I am constantly attempting to discipline myself on is, what do I look at every day?
Hmm.
And for me, I don't look at the market. I don't look at stocks. I even don't really look at a lot of financial news, but I'm about to tell you, you're going to learn something about me here. There are two apps that I go to. I go to a cryptocurrency app that gives me the current price of Bitcoin and some other cryptocurrencies. And I go to my gold app that tells me the current price of gold. That probably also tells you a little bit about some things about where I stand politically and things like that. And I really am wanting to get to where I don't even look at those, because I can't do anything about them. Like you said, there's nothing that I can do. And so when you have clients and they're wanting to know things and they're saying, what do I really need to look at? Are you watching this for me daily, or do I need to watch it daily? What kind of advice do you give people? What do we really need to know in the world we're in today?
I think it's a balance between focusing on what we're actually trying to build financially, like where we're trying to go, where do we want our life to be, and what are our actions and behaviors today? How well are they aligned with that future? So it's ignoring most of what's going on in the world. So a lot of what you talk about when in your leadership coaching is about the difference between being proactive and reactive. And we're reactive human beings. We will always be reactive to some degree. But the more proactive you are towards a long-term goal, the more you are acting on a plan, the less likely you are to react to the crazy world around us. And you said we're an information overload, where we take in a lot of data and information, but we don't execute very well. And I think we need to be really careful about, are we getting intellectually obese? Are we taking in so much information, but then we just sit around and don't do anything with it? And just one thing I'll say is, just kind of close up this thought, is not all data is information. Not all information is knowledge, and not all knowledge is wisdom. And I think we lack a lot of wisdom in our culture. A lot of data, we have a lot of information, but what are you doing? How are you stewarding that? Are you actually implementing that into your daily life? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. And that's how we circle back to our clients is, where are you in relation to where do you want to be in the future? And what are the changes or what are the steps you need to take to be in alignment with that, regardless of what the world is doing around you? Because Tim, what happens in your house is always going to be a bigger impact to your future than what happens in the White House or on any other political platform.
Yeah, amen. That's exactly right. People need to, I'll go back to what you said. I love that you brought this up. Proactive for me is controlling those things you can control. Being reactive is allowing all those things that you probably don't really even have control over can at times beat you to a pulp. I mean, I see it with leaders that I work with, and I'm sure you see it with people in the financial arena also. There's one more word I want to bring up to you that I want you to discuss before we talk about how someone can connect with you and what the process looks like, Chad. And if we want to say anything about the book, Forging Financial Freedom, I left seven wealth building lessons extracted. I like, that's a good word there, from the Alaskan oil field. I'm sure that was intentional with that word, extracted from the oil field. But the word risk, as I was reading through the book, the word risk kept being the word that jumped up. You talked about it a number of times, but I believe because we haven't talked about money, we don't look at it as a tool, or maybe there's other reasons. I think and fear, I think you brought up fear earlier. I think a lot of people have a misconstrued, I don't know if I use that word right, a screwed up way of looking at risk, maybe a better way of saying it. I also think that if we go back to even things like COVID, I was watching all that transpire and I'm going, I don't think people know math. And I'm not going to get controversial here, but I don't think they understand the risk factors that are going on here. Are we as a culture, have we gotten to where we really can't evaluate risk well? And how does that feed into your business?
I believe absolutely 100%. We have misidentified risk, and sometimes we try to eliminate all risk, which is impossible. And we saw this in COVID. I was just talking to somebody in the mental health space a couple days ago, and he works in the school systems, works with the youth a lot. Actually, an ex-NFL player, and just has a passion for youth, especially sports. Like sports probably saved his life. He was in a gang growing up, and a legitimate gang. Like he was in some bad stuff, and there was a coach that kind of pulled him aside and introduced him to Jesus. But it was that community around him that was a part of him becoming a Christian and being converted. And anyways, point being, it was this community that he was surrounded with, like being part of a team. It was so important. And we were so concerned about our kids getting sick, as if that was the biggest risk, that we isolated them. And now we have kids with severe mental health and emotional issues. I mean, look at the suicide numbers coming out of COVID. And I believe a lot of times we fight the wrong dragon. Somebody the other day was, this is at our Super Bowl party. They were asking about some diet stuff. And they're like, well, if this diet, if I do this, here's some of the risks associated with that. And, what do you think about this? Like, this seems extreme over here. As this person is talking to me, she's shoving Oreos and Reese's in her face. And I'm thinking, you're worried about the wrong risk. Like maybe this diet doesn't have enough vegetables, and maybe this diet doesn't have enough protein, but any of those are better than what you're doing right now. So we do not, I believe you're 100% right. As a culture, we do not assess risk well. It's relationships, it's in our health, and it's certainly in our investments.
So if I walk in your door and I'm obviously misguided, or I'm talking about risk, I mean, how do you massage that? How do you work somebody through that who is either fearful or whatever? And it's, we're coming up against our time here. That might be a longer question, but how do you deal with it when somebody comes through your doors and their risk tolerance or whatever is like way out of whack?
Number one, it's getting them to identify what they think risk is, because a lot of people misconstrue risk and volatility as the same thing. And they're not. Now, volatility can be a part of risk, but volatility goes back to that idea of its ambiguity. It's, if I put $100,000 in this investment, it might visit 80,000 on the way to $500,000. That's volatile, but is it necessarily risky? And I'm just going to use, Alaskan analogy. Climbing a mountain, not every step is up. You sometimes have to cross valleys to continue climbing. I think life is that way. Investing is that way. But a lot of us come into investing and life, we want a staircase. Better yet, we want an escalator. We just want to stand there and this thing gradually takes us up. With a mountain, there is some uncertainty. But in order to keep moving towards your goal, you have to be willing to actually take some steps down. It doesn't seem like you're going the right direction. That's where a lot of people get messed up. And I think one of the biggest risks facing investors today is not the temporary principal fluctuations, the price volatility of your investment, but it's the long-term, consistent and permanent eroding of purchasing power due to inflation. So even going back to when I was born, prices on most things now are 4 to 5 times higher than they were when I was born, which means it takes $5 to buy what a dollar did 4.5 decades ago. And that is a huge risk. But going back to your question, Tim, about watching the news and the focus on the now and the moment and being distracted by short term, we get so myopic. We think that the Dow moving however many points in a certain day, that's the risk, when really it's our dollars being slowly chewed up by inflation. It's very subtle. It's usually quiet, maybe not in the last couple of years, but that's just one example of where we fight the wrong dragon. We try to stabilize principal at the cost of hamstringing our long-term purchasing power. And that's getting a lot of people in trouble today.
Yeah, and it goes back to, people aren't looking at long-term thinking, they're short-term. They're still looking at that daily. And I think that's a big thing that we're dealing with. Chad, tell me a little bit about the book, or tell the listener about the book, Forging Financial Freedom. and where they can get it. And then I've got one or two more questions here before we wrap up. I enjoyed it, by the way. It was for a financial book, a nice, this is not a negative, a nice, quick, easy read with some good principles, and I appreciate it. Tell us why you wrote it and where people can find it.
Well, just real quick, and then I'll answer that. Going back to this idea of risk, I think one takeaway that people can hear is a fixed income in a rising cost world is anything but safe. And I think we have confused stability with safety, and that's a big issue. And the other thing that I want to remind people of is financial independence is an income issue. We have to be worrying about our income long term, and we cannot solve long term problems with short term thinking. So that's the end of that. Why did I write the book? I wrote the book because a lot of people aren't thinking correctly, and the book is a little philosophical, but it's about mindsets, because we can't act right for 20 to 30 years if we have the right mindset. We might be able to fake it for a little bit. We might be able to white knuckle it, but to truly engage with a path that serves our long-term future rather than steals from it, we have to think differently. So I wanted to change people's perspectives on how they view money, how they view investing, even how they view retirement, to get their thinking more aligned with an abundant future.
I guess Amazon, all the places, that's where people can find it.
Yeah, they can visit on Amazon, Forging Financial Freedom. And yeah, there's a Kindle version, there's a hardback version, and we're coming out with an audio one here soon.
Good. Are you going to read it with that awesome voice you've got?
Thank you. That is the plan. That's what's taking it so long to happen, because I just wanted to outsource it. And my team's like, no, you need to read it, because these are your stories. They're stories from your clients. You need to read it.
I will tell you, that's hard. Doing an audio book reading, it's a hard thing. I wrote a novel a few years ago, and I was going to do that. And I've, got the equipment and stuff like that. I struggle with it. So I actually got my son to do it for me. So anyway, hey, Chad, if someone's been listening to you and they just love the mindset, you work with people all over the U.S., correct? Are you able to do that? Tell somebody how they would connect with you, and maybe I think you gave some glimpses along the way of the first few steps, but just what that first interaction would look like. Maybe remove some fear of what that first interaction might look like if they reached out to you.
Well, the way to get a hold of us, they can visit our website at veritasalaska.com. And like you said, Tim, we work with people all over the U.S., but we were founded here in Alaska. And I think it's kind of catchy. There's some cachet to having Alaska in there. But that's where they can find us. We're also on Instagram, veritas.alaska, and you can find me on LinkedIn, pretty active on there. But where this starts is identifying where people want to go. And very few people have a consistent, or at least an accurate target of what they'll need to retire and remain comfortably retired for a very long time. And it's really hard to hit a target you can't see. So that's where we start, is getting clear about where do you need to end up to have the life that you want. And I'll admit it, I'll call out the elephant in the room. That can be uncomfortable. We're asking some challenging questions, but they're questions to get people framing their perspective correctly, get them out of the today, focused on their future self. Because I can't tell you what's meaningful to you, Tim. I can't tell you what a meaningful retirement, a job optional life would look like. But if we can figure out together what that looks like, that can give you some very clear pathways to get you there.
Excellent. Thanks for that. We'll include links for the book and also how people can connect with you. Chad, we're seek, go, create. Those 3 words. I'm going to allow you to choose one of those just as the last question. It just resonates more with you, means more. So seek, go, or create. Which one do you choose and why?
I'm going to choose create. And the reason is I never thought of myself as a creative person. I can't draw. I can barely write my own name, but creative means a lot of different things. And I've expanded my view of what create means. And I believe I was created by God to create. And I believe God puts elements of himself inside of each one of this. And I think creation is a part of that. And we all create in different ways. So with that desire, with that innate ability to create, I also believe I've been given specific gifts and talents used or designed to create a better life for those around me and to serve those people. And finance is one of the tools I've used to do that. Other people have other ways, but I love the word create. And that is my goal. My desire is to be a creator of opportunity, a creator of purpose, and a creator of direction and encouragement as long as I'm on this earth and have breath in my lungs.
Love that. Yes. I also believe we're created to create. Some people have that artistic ability. My wife does. I do not, but we are creators. Chad Hufford, thank you. I appreciate this conversation. Make sure you get a copy of Forging Financial Freedom, 7 Wealth Building Lessons Extracted from the Alaskan Oil Field. And if you feel so compelled, just reach out to Chad. I'm sure he'd love to have a conversation with you about some of these topics we've talked about. The next few weeks are packed with some of the most insightful and thought-provoking episodes we've ever done. Make sure you're following and subscribed on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube so you don't miss a single one. Our next episode, 300, this was 299, is a milestone, and we're celebrating in a way we've never done before, extremely unique. For the first time ever, I'll be sitting down for a long-form interview with AI using ChatGPT, asking questions just like I did with Chad today of AI and ChatGPT. We'll see how it goes. We still have to record that. It's going to be fun. We're going to go deep into leadership, faith, business, and the future of technology. And will AI have the answers? I don't know. We'll see. Could raise even more questions. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss this groundbreaking episode. We will see you next week for episode 300.